And you see just below that, Baladev Vijaybhusan, that's BVD, one of the previous acharyas, he gave it the name Vijnana Yoga. We'll touch on these terms, Jnana and Vijnana, shortly. And his Shiksha Guru, his instructing guru, gave a slightly different title, Bhagavad Jnana Vijnana Yoga. So Bhagavat, the personality of Godhead, knowledge and realized knowledge, the yoga system for both, or powers and sweetness of the Lord. So those are titles. Two quick comments, and then we'll go forward. One comment is, those same two acharyas, Baladev and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, have identified that the 18 chapters of Bhagavad Gita have three very simple, general overview type of emphasis. The first 6 of the 18, emphasis on detached work, karma, phala, tyag. Karma, phala, tyag, or karma yoga, which is a subset of bhakti. And the final 6 chapters are strong emphasis in knowledge or gyan yoga. However, the middle 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, which this is the first of those middle 6 chapters, the emphasis is squarely on bhakti. There's mention of both karma and the detached work and knowledge, and thus knowledge of the absolute. But you'll get a sense as we go forward how the knowledge of the absolute relates to bhakti yoga. A second point, just over, before we launch, this chapter 7 makes a certain promise. And the promise is that Krishna is going to explain everything that was the conclusion of the first 6 chapters. It's a how-to section. Krishna made a promise, you'll see shortly, that he gave the identification of the topmost yoga, the Uttama yoga, as bhakti. Now he's going to explain how to execute that bhakti yoga. Actually, there's a third major point. The third major point is, because you've already completed chapter 7, I'm only going to touch on essences, a little bit in some detail, but mainly essences. And as you go forward and you start reading chapter 9 of Bhagavad Gita, don't be surprised when you find the elements of chapter 7 are mirrored in chapter 9. I'll say it again. The elements in chapter 7 are mirrored in chapter 9. Chapter 9 is a further expansion of chapter 7, which means chapter 7 is a really important chapter, so much so it's repeated section by section within chapter 7, you'll find in chapter 9, only with greater refinement and more detail and some important, not just differences, but distinctions. Krishna will point out confidential things about himself. Bhagavat Jnana Vijnana Yoga. So learning chapter 7 will help you very much understand chapter 9, which will help you understand Bhakti Yoga, which will help you understand Krishna. So now let us begin. We'll begin with looking at the connection between chapter 6 and chapter 7. What's chapter 6? It's chapter 6 is Dhyan yoga, yoga of meditation. And Dhyan yoga ends with Krishna saying to Arjun, Arjun, by all means, whatever you do, engage yourself in yoga. And the final verse, of all the systems of yoga, there's a topmost yoga. What's that? The topmost yoga? One who always thinks of me, Madgatain Antaratmana. The topmost yogi is one who always thinks of me in devotion. That's the best. Madgatain Antaratmana. Chapter 7, text 1 explains how to do it, or at least the promise is there that Krishna is going to give the how-to lesson for the Madgatain Antaratmana, which he does. And in that final verse of chapter 6, concentrate on him in full faith. Shadhavan bhajate yo mam. That's the phrase in Sanskrit from the last verse of chapter 6. Shadhavan bhajate yo mam. Have that faith comes from knowledge. Without knowledge, one may doubt Krishna's position. And so Krishna reveals his position. Thus, knowledge of the absolute. Therefore, in chapters 7 through 12, Krishna presents knowledge of himself as the Supreme Personality of Godhead to inspire and strengthen bhakti. The essence is bhakti. The knowledge is not independent from bhakti. It is, it nourishes and strengthens bhakti. That's the connection between these two, chapter 6 and chapter 7. Now let's take a look at the middle 6 chapters. The middle 6 chapters, that's chapters 7 through 12, as mentioned already, its emphasis is bhakti yoga. That has on one side karma yoga or detached work. On the other side, final 6 chapters, emphasis in knowledge. Essentially, Krishna is reiterating knowledge that was given before in the first 12 chapters in the final 6 chapters. He's not introducing something new. He's just drilling down and expanding and elucidating further knowledge about him. So knowledge about him is really important. We heard why. Because without knowledge, we may have doubts. So who is the Supreme Personality of Godhead? And what is his relationship with his energies? And what is my relationship with him? And how do I act in that relationship? And what is the best process of self-realization? All of those 5 what, who, and how to questions, when they're clearly understood, it will nourish bhakti. And if they're not clearly understood, one's bhakti may be weak or intermittent or even, disappear in the temporal sense. Here's something that Prabhupada wrote about this chapter 7, and he writes about it in chapter 8. One should try to understand these chapters not by scholarship or mental speculation, but by hearing them in association with devotees. Chapter 7 through 12 are the essence of the Bhagavad Gita. So you've already begun. You've covered, my understanding is you've already covered chapter 7. This is just a review. So it's the beginning of capturing the essence of the entire Bhagavad Gita. The first 6 and the last 6 chapters are like the coverings of the middle 6 chapters, which are especially protected by the Lord. especially protected by the Lord. Here's what Prabhupada is making simple, something that our acharyas say. Listen. Supposing you have some valuables that's passed down generation from generation, they're heirlooms in the family, some wealth, some jewels or whatever those things are, gold or something. Question, where do you put them? A, put them in your backyard. B, hang them by the gate in your front, to the front of the house. Or C, you put them in the middle of the house for safekeeping. Easy answer. Next, this is our acharyas. Supposing there's a procession of a VIP, the governor of some place is coming to visit another place. So in the procession, A, the governor is at the front. B, the governor's at the rear. Or C, the governor's in the middle. And in the front is the military, and behind the governor is all of his representatives and ministers and other supportive team. It's in the middle. So that's what Prabhupada is saying here. The middle 6 chapters are especially protected by the Lord. If one is fortunate enough to understand Bhagavad Gita, especially these middle 6 chapters, in the association of devotees, then his life at once becomes glorified beyond other things that are recognized within the Vedas as helpful, auspicious, beneficial, penances, sacrifices, charities, speculations, etc. For one can achieve all the results of these activities simply by Krishna consciousness. So I hope you're sitting on the edge of your seat to understand very carefully chapter 7, because it's the essence and will bestow all desirable things. So here's the several sections of chapter 7. Starts with the first 3 verses where there's emphasis on the hearing process. We can know about Krishna simply by hearing about him. That's pretty simple. The second section, knowing Krishna's material and spiritual energies. So that's part of the subset of what knowing Krishna is about, Krishna and his energies. The next section, just 2 verses, Krishna controls the modes, therefore surrender to him. That's the third section. Bhakti is resting upon knowing the object to surrender unto, and there's a reason to surrender unto Krishna, and that's when we can become free from the modes. And then there's some next section. Some people do, some people don't. And so we'll hear about those that do and don't, because Krishna will teach it. The 5th section, there's options for those that don't, and those that surrender to demigods, and those that surrender to some impersonal conception or feature. Those are in the categories, those that don't. And then the final section, those that don't become bewildered, and then there's a way of becoming free from bewilderment, and that's by knowing Krishna. Nice package, isn't it? And again, it'll be expanded in the same, not exactly the same sequence, but the same pattern of sections in chapter 9. So learn chapter 7 very nicely. You'll be well on your way to understand the most confidential knowledge that's in chapter 9. Okay, that was all a preliminary, and off we go, starting with the first 3 verses. That's emphasis on the hearing process. And here's the verse. And because of time, I'm not going to go through all the Sanskrit of these verses, but you see in the lower right corner, tat, shrinu, tat, shrinu. means now hear from me. Tat Shrinu, the Supreme Personality Godhead said, now hear, O son of Pritha. How? By practicing yoga in full consciousness of me, same as the last verse of chapter 6. This is a how-to promise, and Krishna keeps his promise. How to practice yoga in full consciousness of Krishna, with mind attached to Krishna, and that's the method for knowing Krishna in full, free from doubt. And that's a big promise. Look in the third to the last line, asamshayam samagram mam yata gyasyachi. We're going to take a look at these terms, those ones just mentioned. There's stages to achieve the perfection spoken of at the end of chapter 6 that starts with hearing, Shrinu. And by hearing, you can know, Gyasyachi. And what will you know? You'll have samagram, complete knowledge. And without a doubt, such complete knowledge, there's no longer a doubt. Remember, doubt may exist if you don't really know. But if you really know, then the doubt is gone. Now going back to 6.47, Madashraya, it's taking shelter of Krishna. And Yogam Yunjan, in practice of Krishna consciousness. Maya Sakta Manak Partha, with mind attached to me. So if we had more time, you probably spent substantial time on these terms. So I'm not going to drill down, but it's review. Starts with hearing. So now one might ask, a thoughtful person is going to ask, how does this hearing process work? We're always hearing something. So here's the ear that's hearing something. And it looks like musical notes, but with the musical notes, there's Krishna. And Bhagavad Gita actually means song of Krishna. So when one hears the song of Krishna, something happens. It enters into the lotus of the heart, if you're hearing properly, or gradually through the process of hearing, the cleansing takes place, and it helps you make the contact or connection, yoga, with Krishna, Krishna yoga. And when that happens, the modes of material nature are broken. And as the modes of material nature are broken, then one's heart becomes situated in pure goodness. That's very wonderful. And when the heart becomes situated in pure goodness, there's only one thing to do. You worship Krishna. You engage in unalloyed, unmixed devotional service. That's how the hearing process works. Tat Shrinu. Then comes another natural question, because we're always hearing something. What's the right source to hear from, or where or from whom do we hear? You see the purport, Prabhupada writes, no one can be a greater authority than Krishna. And therefore, by hearing from him, one receives the greatest opportunity to become a perfect Krishna conscious person. One therefore has to learn from Krishna directly, or from a pure devotee of Krishna, not from a non-devotee upstart puffed up with academic education. Of course, I'll assume all of you are really clear about those who are puffed up with academic education. There's some toxicity over there. So we're a little cautious about the puffed up academic people, because they really can't teach us Krishna's message properly or the goal of life properly, because that pride and merely academic approach to Bhagavad Gita isn't going to work. So we're a little cautious about that source. We want to hear directly from Krishna. And if you can't hear directly from Krishna, those who are in disciplic succession from Krishna, which you learned in chapter 4, the importance of disciplic succession. Okay, so that was the first verse. Remember, the first 3 of chapter 7 are dealing with the hearing process. So here's telling Krishna's teaching. Jnanam teham savijnanam. Note these terms, jnana and vijnana. Jnana and vijnana. Now, Prabhupada would speak of these 2 terms, jnana as knowledge or theoretical knowledge, and vijnana is realized spiritual knowledge. So now Krishna is making a really bold declaration. He is going to describe in full asheshataha vakshami. It's sound. Vakshami. Vak means speech or sound. By sound, things will be revealed. But when you read Bhagavad Gita, good to read it. Not just, good to read it aloud and hear the sound, because it has a potency. I shall now declare unto you in full this knowledge, both phenomenal and numinous. So phenomenal, jnanam, and numinous, vijnanam. So we'll see these terms shortly. They're explained a little bit more. This being known, nothing further shall remain for you to know. Well, that's a big promise. Little story. Once in New York, long, long ago, Prabhupada was asked from a question answer session. Somebody asked Prabhupada, Swamiji, I heard that one who becomes a knower of Krishna becomes a knower of everything. Is that true? You'll see going forward what that means. And Prabhupada said, yes. Then the person asked, can you tell me how many windows there are in the Empire State Building? And Prabhupada's immediate response was, how many drops of water are there in a mirage? That was a cool answer. Knowing everything doesn't mean minutia. Knowing everything means you know the essence, and from the essence you can connect everything with its source. You'll see shortly. But nothing shall remain for you to know. Gyatavyam avashishyate. Jnanam, phenomenal knowledge, is an object perceived by our senses, and it may be seen as disconnected from Krishna, and vijnanam is seen as connection. Same object, as per its inherent property, independent of our sense perception, connected with Krishna. And that's coming up. He says, Krishna, this verse, I'll explain these things. And this is where he explains, starting with text 7, the connection of Krishna's energies with him. Then with that understanding, that's noumenal knowledge, different than merely what you can see with your senses. That's nice knowledge, vijnanam. Now, there are some persons, they like just knowledge for knowledge's sake. And they like to, it's not to say everyone that reads, it's just knowledge for knowledge's sake, but there's a certain class of people who study for knowledge's sake. But there's a kind of knowing where there's nothing further to be known. And how does that work? It works when if we know the source. This is a painting meant to show on the left side Rupa and Sanatan, and they're studying scripture and writing. And on the right side is what are they writing about, or the source of knowledge for them is the Bhagavatam, that makes the connection of all things with their emanation source. And if we know the source, we know everything. At least knowing everything means, just like we heard, apart from what you can perceive with your senses, it's understanding the connection of all things with the source. And when that is understood, if we know the source, we can know the connection of all things with the source. Things are moving under this, at least the sanction of the one who controls everything. That's Paramatma, the super soul. Now, this is just a little dabbling in this point. Sometimes we hear Bhagavad Gita as a preliminary text. Bhagavad Gita, pictured on the left, that's the undergraduate. Shmavagatama is the graduate. Chaitanya Charitamrita is the postgraduate. So if it's a preliminary book, how is it that you can know everything, nothing further to be known? That's a good question, isn't it? And one answer, there could be others. In the Bhagavad Gita, where it's what's revealed is Bhagavan. He is revealing himself. There's this saying in the West, scripture, revealed scripture. Revealed scripture. The word of God is revealed message of God. So God knows, and he reveals himself through scripture. So in Bhagavad Gita, he is revealing his identity, his name, his qualities, etc., and the means to connect with him. But God's identity is identified in Bhagavad Gita. God's activity is described in the Bhagavatam, and God's mentality, or his transcendental emotion in love with his part and parcel living entities, and so forth. I'm going to have to keep moving because any one of these points, it's really easy to spend a whole bunch of time, but my assignment is an overview. So off we go. Now, it's stated Bhagavad Gita is complete. How is it it's complete? Because it's only 700 verses. So what, you can't have any more than 700 verses to have complete. It means principles are given and details on the completeness of all details can never, there's nothing that has that. But there's 3 essential truths. And you'll read in Bhagavad Gita, these 3 essential truths: matter, spirit, and the controller are both. In fact, it's right in chapter 7. Matter, spirit, and the controller are both. And when one understands these 3 things, this is the essence. That's how it's complete. I'm pausing because we just completed the first 3 verses, and that's section 1. And now we're going on to section 2. And that's knowledge of Krishna's material and spiritual energies. And of course, he's the controller of both. So there's material energies, text 4. The living entity is a spiritual energy. And 6 and 7, Krishna is the controller of both. And thus, up to the end, he's the essence of everything. That's a nice little section. He's the essence of everything. Whether spiritual material, he's the essence of spiritual material. He's the essence. That's knowledge of his relationship with material and spiritual energies. So let's start with the material nature. There's a nice illustration on the left side indicating what the verse says. There's 8 ashtada, 8 divisions of Prakriti, Prakriti ashtada, and they're given the adjective bina, separated. I'm sure you know the verse: earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, false ego. That's 8. That's his separated energies. However, is there anything that's ever separated? Well, it appears to be separated. All created beings have their source in these 2 natures. I skipped the jiva because that's the para prakriti. Para prakriti is number 5, and apara prakriti is number 4. There's 8, and then there's para, prakriti. So all created beings have their source in these two natures, spiritual, material. Of all that is material and all that is spiritual in this world, know for certain that I am both the origin and the dissolution. So things come from Krishna, they rest in Krishna, and when the dissolution comes, they're withdrawn back within Krishna. And there isn't something that's separate from that. Yeah, there isn't anything that's separate. You'll see, I think it's coming up. Prabhupada once said, really simple, there's only two things. That's Krishna and Krishna's. There's not a third thing in the creation of God. If there was a third thing, then that's something that exists separate from Krishna. There's no such thing. Even, a vacuum or, the state of nothingness, it doesn't exist. There's nothing that doesn't exist other than Krishna and Krishna's. There's a whole another topic that could take another class to discuss. There are people that think there is such a thing as nothingness or void or nirvana in the sense of the cessation of material existence. But that has its place. By the way, we're just reading in yesterday morning and the morning before about that place. It's called Mahakalapur. There's a place where people think there's nothing. But the Supreme Lord is also there, and he makes that place for people who want nothingness. But there's a somethingness to it, and it's connected to Krishna. Another time, another class. We're doing a summary here. So text 7 is after identifying these two, and Krishna is saying nothing exists except the combination of these two, and they rest in him. He then goes further, drills on this one. Oh, conqueror of wealth, there's no truth superior to me. Like if those two things are resting in Krishna, where does Krishna come from? You've heard that one before. God is the source of everything. What's the source of God? It's a rhetorical question. There is no source of God because he's the source of everything. And that's what this verse is saying. Everything rests upon me as pearls are strung on a thread. Hey, look at, there's some pearls strung on a thread. And you don't see the thread. Where's the thread? You see the pearls, but you don't see the thread. And a nice illustration, the Supreme Lord spreads his energies just as a tree spreads its roots. Well, wait a minute, I don't see the roots. Where's the roots? But you don't have the tree without the roots. Those that know about trees, you don't have trees without roots. And you don't have strings of pearls without the string. But okay, if he's holding everything together, why don't we see him? Answer, just as we do not see the thread that is holding the pearls together in a necklace, similarly, we cannot see Krishna directly through this manifestation. How then? Krishna can be known only by hearing. Listen carefully, because then you can know Krishna by hearing. Although you may not be able to see him any more than you can see the thread that's holding the pearls together in a necklace, or the roots of a tree that are supporting the tree. Without the root, there's no tree. Without the string, there's no necklace. Just stepping back slightly, because this is an overview of chapter 7. There are other places in Bhagavad Gita where Krishna's relationship with matter is discussed. Here he's the essence, and 10 is he's the best of the essence or everything, and 15 he's the maintainer of everything. Knowledge of Krishna's relationship with matter. So now let's take some examples, because that's the last section, 8 through 12. We'll go quickly because this is an overview. Oh, son of Kunti, I'm the taste of water, the light of the sun and the moon. Notice there's both in that image. The syllable Om in the Vedic mantras. I'm the sound in ether and the ability in man. Whatever there is, Krishna's it, or Krishna is the source of it. Just as the sun, God is perceived in the sunshine, Krishna is perceived in his all-pervading energies. That's Prabhupada's words and a little illustration to help us understand Krishna's words. 9, I'm the original fragrance of the earth, and I'm the heat of fire, the life of all that lives. I'm the penance of all ascetics. In fact, you're not going to find something that Krishna isn't. Just as the root of a tree maintains the tree, so Lord Krishna, the root of all things, maintains everything. Text 10. So that's a little summary. It goes up to 12. Now we're going to go to the third section. Hope your seatbelt is fastened because I'm moving quickly. And we're already, well into our allotted time. Section 3. It's just 2 verses. Krishna controls the modes, therefore surrender. That this picture. Krishna is above. There's the 3 modes. There's the cloud beneath the 3 modes, and there's living entities being controlled by the 3 modes. Now there's a way to cut those 3 modes, and that's by the hearing process. If Krishna is everywhere, why can one not see him as an essence of everything? Presence everywhere. Well, the hearing process cuts through that ignorance, but there's ignorance. Diluted by the 3 modes, goodness, passion, ignorance. The whole world does not know me, whom above the modes and inexhaustible. So if you want to know Krishna, you have to go above the modes. And there's a way to go above the modes. Devotional service. Nicely done. So here's a nice illustration of passion, goodness in the lower right, and there's ignorance. Recognize that somebody's intoxicated over there. And we covered up the eyes because they're in ignorance. How to go beyond the modes? There's a good illustration. Daivi yeshu gunamai mama maya duratyaya. Surrender to Krishna. It's difficult to overcome, but those who have surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it. There's an explanation Prabhupada gives. The illustration tells the explanation. If you're bound up by ropes, you can't free yourself unless somebody that's not bound up by ropes comes and frees you. So that's Krishna or Krishna's devotee. Make it possible to become free from the modes. And misery comes from the modes. And we're really confined by those modes, as you see in both of these illustrations. So goodness is not liberating. Goodness is goodness, but it's constricting also. So that's 3 sections. The modes bind us. That's why we can't see, although Krishna is all pervading. And becoming free is surrender to Krishna. Section 4. Remember, we have 6 sections. Section 4. Just 4 verses, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. There are those that don't and those that do surrender. And you're familiar with this section, I'm sure. Over in the lower left, that's those who don't. In the lower right, there's those that do. And some of those that do, they have their motivation. They're poor. They want relief from distress. Some are curious. Some are searching knowledge. That's the 4 categories in the lower right. And then there's Krishna. The impious don't surrender, the pious do. So what about really learned people? How come we don't see that they surrender if it's just they're fixed in knowledge? And there's a verse. Look at that. Krishna is saying why they don't. Demons do not surrender unto me because they partake of an atheistic nature. They're against. And there's 4 categories. Those who are grossly foolish, those who are among the lowest of mankind, those whose knowledge is stolen by illusion, maya yaparityana, and they partake of atheistic nature. 4 categories. They just choose, we're not going to surrender to Krishna. But there are some that do. There's another illustration. Those that are suffering, those that want wealth, those that are curious, and those that have knowledge. Those are the 4 types that do. What about people that don't, the miscreant fellows? What's the hope for them? And how can a pious person become a pure devotee? That's sometimes asked. And take the association of sadhu. There's a nice photograph of Prabhupada walking into an assembly of people that were in the miscreant category before, not because they were bad people, they just had bad association and therefore they were doing miscreant things, like a lot of people in this world. Here's Prabhupada's commentary. It's important, so I've included it. It's from New York, 1966, speaking to newcomers at 2nd Avenue in New York City. He is pious, he is distressed, and at the same time he is foolish, because he does not know. God is with me, dwelling within my heart, the soul and the super soul, both of them sitting together, and God knows everything about me, so I do not need to pray to God to get me out of this distress. He knows everything. When you pray, ask for surrender to God. Pray to glorify God and know his greatness, but do not pray for selfish interest, for example, for food. A pure devotee does not pray to God for any personal interest. If he is distressed, he says, "Oh Lord, it is your kindness. You have put me in distress just to rectify me. I should have many more trials, but you are giving me few. That is your mercy." That is his vision. A pure devotee is not disturbed. Now, this is from a lecture to newcomers in the Lower East Side of New York City, 1966. A person who is in Krishna consciousness doesn't care for all this material distress, insult, or honor because he's aloof from it all. He knows very well this designation, this honor, this insult pertain to my body, but I'm not this body. Because he believed in the immortality of the soul, Socrates was condemned to death and he was asked to take hemlock. The judge said, "Socrates, how do you want to be put into the grave?" He replied, "First of all, you catch me, then you can put me into the grave." Who is completely conversant with Krishna science knows well, I am not this body, I am part and parcel of Krishna. My eternal relation is with Krishna. Now, I could have skipped that for the overview of chapter 7, but I thought it was really nice, so I included it. And I want to finish the chapter, so I'm going to move along. Text 17. There are these 4, those that surrender to Krishna. The best is one who's in full knowledge and who is always engaged in pure devotional service. I am very dear to him and he is dear to me. Oh, one might ask, why is this one, the Jnani, being singled out? And Nitya Yukta, it's mentioned. He's free from material desires and he's constantly serving. Nitya Yukta. Because of that knowledge, there's value in knowledge of Krishna, because then it's impetus to take shelter of Krishna. Someone who has factual knowledge, not just bookworm information, but factual knowledge of Krishna is an impetus. They're constantly serving. Eka bhakti, they're unmotivated. That is, there are those that are motivated. And those that are motivated, I fulfill their desires, but when their desires fulfilled, then what happens? See you later, Charlie. That's what happens. Thank you very much, Krishna. I'm busy now. I've got to go take care of my worldly life. You're very kind, and see you later till the next distress comes. But those that are free from material desires, they're constantly serving. And that free from material desire is made possible by knowledge that we're not the body. And our real position is Krishna's servant. Okay, we have just 2 more sections to go, and they're more quick. There are those that don't have, they're mentioned, are these 2 categories. Those who do surrender to demigods, and those that do to surrender to an impersonal conception. And you recognize, I'm sure, on the left, that's Adi Shankara and his group of followers. And on the right, I'm sure you recognize there are different devas and devis unto whom people surrender for their material wants. So, question for this section: what's the position of those who surrender but not to Krishna? Well, Krishna is very direct. He doesn't like fool around. He says that their intelligence has been stolen by material desire. And because their intelligence is stolen by material desire, they surrender to others. And they may follow rules and regulations for those other types of worship, but the resting point, the foundation is their higher intelligence is stolen by the material desires. So they're chasing, some intelligence is there to follow demigod worship according to rules and regulations, and so they can get what they want. And sure enough, they get what they want. So it confirms I did the right thing because I got what I wanted. Pratigyana. And how is their faith nourished? Well, they get what they want. That's how it's nourished. I am in everyone's heart as the super soul. As soon as one desires to worship some demigod, I make his faith steady so that he can devote himself to that particular deity. Om Jaya Jagadisha Hare. And there's a reciprocation. You see in the upper left corner, there's Krishna overseeing everything. It's actually meant from him and by him, because he sees what they're doing and he sees what their desire. So he gives them the faith that's from super soul within the heart, and there's results. And so confirmed. That's what's in the next verse. Endowed with such a faith, he endeavors to worship a particular demigod and obtains his desires. But in actuality, these benefits are bestowed by me alone. If you look carefully, you'll see benefits, but you'll also see Krishna as the remote bestower. Then, so that's how they engage with faith. What about what's their destination? Well, it's very clear. Men of small knowledge worship the demigods, and their fruits are limited and temporary. Those who worship the demigods go to the planets of the demigods. But my devotees ultimately reach my supreme planet. There's more that you'll find in chapter 9. So let's complete chapter 7. Surrender to impersonalism. Avyaktam vyaktim apanam manyate mam abodhayaha abodhayaha. Bodhi means intelligence. You put the prefix a in front, you know what it means. Unintelligent men who do not know me perfectly think that I, the Supreme Personality of God and Krishna, was impersonal before. And when I assumed this personality, Due to their small knowledge, they do not know my higher nature, which is imperishable and supreme. Well, wait a minute. If Krishna and his form, characteristics, abode, and worshippers are all eternal, why he can't be seen? This is the third time the same question is being asked. Some people ask this question. And look at this. Here's the answer. I am never manifest to the foolish and unintelligent. For them, I am covered by my yogamaya, my internal potency. Yogamaya has a reflected feature of Mahamaya. So the reflection of the internal potency is the Mahamaya potency. But he uses Yogamaya Samavrita. And therefore they do not know. They can't. I'm really trying to meet my deadline here. And I've already gone past my time limit. So here we go. Final section. Look at this. It's 5 verses. Bewildered because of not surrendering to Krishna, and freedom by knowing Krishna. Hey, it's important to know Krishna, isn't it? We don't want to be bewildered. We want to become free. Here's the first, mystical Krishna. Oh, Arjuna, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, I know everything that happened in the past, all that is happening in the present, and all things that are yet to come. I also know all living entities, but me, no one knows. Moving quickly. Oh, Arjuna. Oh, this is the same verse. Little cartoon or drawing. Just as the sun, moon, and stars cannot be permanently covered by clouds, the Supreme Lord cannot be covered by illusion. That's Prabhupada's comment and nice illustration. How and when did the living entities become covered by Maya? That's a common question, isn't it? The fall of the jiva question. Why is it that the person who knows you is very rare? Well, here's one answer from Bhagavad Gita. All living entities are born into delusion, bewildered by dualities, arisen from desire and hate. Icha dvesha. Icha dvesha. That's the culprit. It's misuse of free will. There we are. We're covered. Is there anyone capable of overcoming illusion? You bet. Who are those? Persons who have acted piously in previous lives and in this life, and whose sinful actions are completely eradicated, are freed from the dualities of delusion, and they engage themselves in my service with determination. So be in that category, with piety and freed from sin, and you can be beyond duality. Now, I'm very sorry because time is crunching. I'm moving quickly, and I'm going to keep going. Here's the last verse. What happens if you take that full shelter? Those in full consciousness of me, who know me, the Supreme Lord, to be the governing principle of the material manifestation of the demigods and of all methods of sacrifice, can understand and know me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, even at the time of death. You can know Krishna before the time of death too. That's recommended. Now, it's been nearly an hour, 55 minutes, and it was supposed to be 45 minutes. But that's chapter 7, summary. I hope I didn't lose anybody in the dust, but there's chapter 7. Let's see if there's some comments. Ajita, you want to handle this?
Yes, Maharaj. Any questions from anyone, you can unmute yourself and ask Maharaj. Go ahead, Yogesh.
Oh, Hare Krishna, Maharaj. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. And please please pardon my ignorance. I have few basic questions that has been lingering for a couple of days, and I wanted to ask them. I'll try to keep it as short as I can. So in Bhagavad Gita in chapter 7, verses 1 to 3, it says that um, we can know Krishna when we know the source or the root. We know everything in existence, but we also know the fact that the source, that is Krishna, is ever expanding, unmanifested, unborn. And how is it even possible to know Krishna if he's always expanding?
Well, not only expanded, he's unlimited. However, whether all expanding or not, he's unlimited. So how can the limited know the unlimited? Right?
Yes, exactly.
Ever expanding or not, unlimited. The answer, it's in Queen Kunti's prayers, and it's also in Brahma's prayers. The answer is embedded there. The answer is you can know him according to the capacity of revelation. You can know him. Now it says you can know me in full, free from doubt, but that fullness of knowing Krishna is not the fullness of Krishna. That sounds like double talk. I'll say it again. The living entity is tiny. Krishna is unlimited. So the tiny cannot know the unlimited because the unlimited is unlimited. But one can know the essence of Krishna according to what is revealed by Krishna to the living entity. And that's sufficient, or is complete. Complete in the sense that the true identity of who you are and who I am and who each of us is can be known. And the nature of Krishna in principle can be known. And then the revelation is dynamic. It's ever increasing, ever increasing, ever increasing. So that's the completeness. It's ever increasing completeness. It's not static, it's dynamic completeness.
Yes, Maharaj, understood. The second question is, so as we progress down these verses, it is said that, here only when you hear, about Krishna. We have all been gifted by Krishna with the ability to hear. What happens to those people who do not possess the ability to hear?
What happened to those people who do what?
Who do not possess the ability to hear.
Okay. On my table upstairs, there's a little device that amplifies sound. It's circular and it plugs into USB. So bring it down. What happens to those who are deaf is the question. Is that correct?
Yes, Maharaj.
Okay. It acts on the heart, and those living entities can become transcendentally benefited just by hearing transcendental sound vibration, because it acts on the platform of the soul. Now, the brain, that's if you hook up that person's brain or brain waves to some device, you may not see some activity because it may not be acting on the mechanical or neurological system, but it's acting on the platform of the soul. Now, I don't know what would happen if there was a deaf person and they're hearing Bhagavad Gita. Would there be shown activity on some instrument that shows brain activity? Maybe, maybe not. But if you could hook it up to the soul, there's no such instrument. But the soul is revived and awakened. It's something like, it's not the same, but it's something like Bilvamangala Thakur, who he wasn't deaf, but he was blind, but he could see Krishna. So it happens then on the platform of the heart or the platform of the soul that consciousness in the human form of life can be revived by the hearing process, even if the auditory instrument is broken. It acts on the soul.
Yes, Maharaj. And the final question is, there are many times we recite the Vedas, and the Vedas comprise of hymns and everything of so many other demigods. But when we recite the Vedas only for the pure happiness of Krishna, would it be more like an insult, or would it be against the Vaishnava etiquettes to do so?
To do so what?
To recite the Vedas, because it has hymns of all the other demigods as well.
The answer is not an insult, because
I'm sorry.
those that are let me finish. Those that are Krishna conscious will understand the purpose behind those hymns of the Vedas, and that section of the Vedas that deal with glorification of demigods, etc., etc. So such a person, a Krishna conscious person, is far more attracted to those portions of the Vedas that are revealing Krishna directly. And that's specifically Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. So those sections we're most interested in. But it wouldn't be offensive, because one would know where those are coming from. It's for gradual elevation. You'll find a nice description in Canto 7 of Srimad Bhagavatam, the final 5 chapters, starting with chapter 11, chapter 12, going to the end. It gives the gradual process. So those that aren't chanting the Vedas, it's a gradual process. It's not offensive to do so. But a person in knowledge knows it's a very gradual process. And why not take the direct process? Prabhupada's example is very simple. Supposing someone says, touch your nose. There's a very direct method. Your finger goes up and you touch your nose. And there's an indirect method. You can wrap your arm around the back of your head and touch your nose. And it's also touching the nose. But direct is far more direct. So it's not offensive. It's just not going to have the same fullness of effect quickly.
All right.
Yes, Maharaj. Thank you, Maharaj.
Next question is from Krishna. Hare Krishna Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. As we have heard, the Bhagavad Gita has been spoken by the Lord himself to deliver the fallen souls and give them the ability to transcend this material world. So why did Krishna choose to hide the middle 6 chapters and protect it specially, as stated by Srila Prabhupada? Thank you.
Well, it's protection. That's the why. It's there. Actually, the message of bhakti is in all 18 chapters. But it may not be so evident to the casual reader. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada in his purports made it very clear, the first 6 and final 6 chapters, bhakti, bhakti, bhakti. He made it really easy for the reader, because readers may be distracted and lazy. But the purpose is protection.
All right. Next question is from Indranath. He's saying, chapter 7, text 27. Why are they considered rare devotees?
Well, statistically, it's a fact. That's why it's stated, because it's a fact. But why it's rare is those that come to this material world are interested in enjoyment separate from Krishna or apart from Krishna. That's the inspiration or the motive to be in the material world. So it's rare because people are here because they want, And then they become conditioned by those modes of enjoying separate from Krishna. That's why it's rare.
Okay, Santosh Prabhu, you can unmute and ask.
Yeah. Hare
Please
Krishna
ask
Prabhu.
loudly and clearly.
Yeah. Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandavat Pranam. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Prabhu, in chapter 7, first verse, it says, practicing yoga in full consciousness of me, with mind attached to me. So this attachment of mind to Krishna, this mind is always bewildered and always wavering. Few practical tips for neophyte devotees for us to steadily attach mind with Krishna. It will be very helpful for us. Hare Krishna.
Ajita, you want to say it? I couldn't follow.
He said, Krishna says that mind attached to me. So
Yes.
how the mind is always wavering. So for a neophyte devotee, how can one, what is there some tips that one can do to attach their mind to Krishna?
Yeah. Practice. Hearing. Practice. Hearing. Practice. Hearing. And hear from the right sources with faith. That's another important. So I know that my mind has a tendency to waver, but because I have faith, I continue to hear from the right sources, knowing that by hearing as to my capacity to hear attentively, purification will take place. And how attentively will determine how quickly or how much time, how long it will take for that purification. But it's with faith, and due to that faith, some attentiveness. So that's a core tip in practice, hearing with attention. Next.
And
All right. Okay. If there are any last questions. If not, I'll just conclude. Thank you, Guru Maharaj. Thank you so much for giving us your time, and for all of you attending. You're very, very fortunate. It says in scriptures, Labha Matra Sadhu Sange, Sarva Siddhi Hai. So 1/16th of a second with this pure devotee, we can get all our perfections. We got more than an hour with Maharaj. So we're very grateful to Maharaj. Let's offer our obeisances to His Holiness Romapada Swami Maharaj. Romapada Swami Maharaj ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Thank you so much, Maharaj. Hari Bol. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.